Hi, hi, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Yes, I
me?
can hear you. It's so nice to have you here. So
Yeah,
we can,
happy to join.
so we can start already. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So just a brief
okay.
introduction. Hi everyone. Welcome to my Twitter space. Here we have conversations with women leaders in the open source ecosystem. And today, I am excited to have Joanna here with me to share our experiences in open source. Joanna is currently a Python core developer and director of the Python Software Foundation, doing research and garbage collection in Python with the IBM Center. I'm excited to share that Joanna is the first African Python core developer that leads research at IBM. Joanna, welcome again, and thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm very privileged and very happy to have joined your space and talk to you today.
So,
Yeah.
which city are you currently based in?
So I'm based in Fredericton in a province called New Brunswick
Oh,
in
oh,
Canada.
okay. And how is the
Yeah.
weather over there today?
It's a bit, it's fine, a bit of sunshine. So it's spring, so the temperatures are a bit not that bad. Yeah.
That's fine. I think the same thing here. It's not
Yeah.
so bad as well. The temperature is very good today. So,
Oh, where are you
I'm
based?
based in Sweden, Helsingborg.
Okay.
Yeah, a city called
Oh,
Helsingborg.
nice.
Yeah. It's been
Mm-hmm.
mostly sunny all day, so I
Mm-hmm.
think we're gradually getting there with the weather. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I was thinking that we could start our conversation, talking about basically how did you get involved in open source? What's your story?
Okay. So I was working for I was working for my first company after university. It was called Laboremus. And then I wanted to develop my skills so that I sort of be like in my mind then I'll use the actual words I had then when I had just joined my first job, software engineering
Mm-hmm.
job at Laboremus, Uganda. I was thinking that since I stay in Uganda, my skills were not that good. So I always had this anxiety and pressure that I needed to have world class skills, like my software engineering skills needed to be world
Mm-hmm.
class. So much as I had that job, after like over the weekend, I would be online trying to look at GitHub and seeing how developers like in the
Mm-hmm.
US were doing things. Because in my mind then, I thought like folks in Europe were better than me and I needed to compete, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that came out was that most of those people that I was reading about, it's not the right mindset, I'm just saying, but that was the mindset I
Mm-hmm.
had then. Now I know better,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when I watched many developers that I used to read about their stories, there is even a developer I knew. She was called Susan Fowler. She was at Uber, and I was reading her story. She was like as old as I am,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but most of the things I saw about them and what I admired about them is that the skills they learned them by working on open source
Mm-hmm.
projects or by working on open source software. So I said, okay, maybe I didn't know what even open source means, but everyone, I would watch their YouTube and then they would say, oh, I work on open source and I'm going to talk about this open source tool. So I was like, I think when I work on open source, I will be a world class developer. So that's what made me to start contributing to open source. So I had some experience as a software engineer then because I was working for a fintech company, but I decided to like apply for like an open source internship. So to me it felt like most people would think I stepped down, right? Because I was already like, well, I was entry level engineer then. So to apply for an internship most folks thought I was stepping down, but to me, I thought that was the only way I was going to get started into open source. So I applied for an open source internship called Rails Girl Summer of Code.
Mm-hmm.
Then these days it stopped, but then it was it was like
Okay.
outreachy, very popular at the time. So I worked on my first open source project called Qt Browser. It was Python. It's a Python based browser, and it's how you navigate the web using commands like Vim commands. If you know Emacs
Yeah,
or Vim,
yeah.
so you don't use the keyboard, your mouse more. So I love that project. So that's how I started into open source. And then after, I also did outreach because I really wanted to have my footing in open source. So that is how I started to contribute to open source. After outreach, I wrote my first book after the project I did in outreach. So it was true. Those people were saying the truth. Because even me, when I started to contribute to open source, I started to develop my skills. That's how I wrote a book. And then later I became a core developer. So they didn't lie to me. And yeah, because when I started to be involved, I still started to live the life they were talking about. Yeah, so that's how I started into open source.
Well, your story is quite, I would say it's quite interesting. Because it's a different thing when someone says you're stepping down while you're supposed to be stepping up, or you basically know what you intend to achieve. And looking at this, the outcome was great. I mean, you wrote a book, you
Yeah,
knew better, and then
yeah.
you got better position. I was just thinking, while you were speaking, what were the attributes I think that you had that helped you to continue regardless of what other people were saying to you at the time?
Okay, so there has to be an attitude of, I think you have to have a unique drive of your own,
Yeah.
right? A unique drive of your own goals and where you want to see yourself, and not caring about where you live, right? So that at the time, of course, I'm from Uganda, so that's where I was living at the time. And I used to go to this meetup. It was called Geek Night Kampala. It was organized by ThoughtWorks. ThoughtWorks is an international
Mm,
company, and it had offices in Uganda at the time. And that meetup was known for like very expert people, senior engineers, and every time many people never used to go to that meetup because they feared that every time somebody was speaking, we would not understand anything because the topics were very technical,
mm,
right? But in my mind, I started to tell myself, but I want to be very technical. Why am I really being afraid of these meetups then? Let me go. In the first meetup, I'll only understand one
mm,
word, but then in the second meetup, I'll understand three. By the fourth meetup, I will understand four things,
yeah.
right? So I had my own special goal of like I wanted to learn. And that goal is what pushed me. I never cared if I was
Mm,
embarrassed about not knowing a certain vocabulary that they were talking about in that meetup. That did not bother me. I just was interested in learning. And when I read about other developers and how they had better skills through, for example, writing blog
mm,
posts,
mm,
right? I never cared that in my school or in my community in Kampala, no one was writing tech blog
mm,
posts. That didn't bother me. I only had the goal of, I also want to generate technical
mm,
content. It doesn't matter whether I'm Ugandan, I know Ugandan has ever done it. So me, I was a little bit more motivated by my personal goals of learning and not caring about what my environment can or cannot do.
mm.
I was like, it's me, not I'm not just a normal. It's me and not just Kampala
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
I think that this is quite interesting. You have a very strong persistence, I'll say, into what you want to achieve, and you
yeah,
have them drawn out, which I think is very key.
yeah,
That um, most women, these are some of the things that draws us back. Not wanting to, push on or have contribution within the open source space. So this is quite interesting. But then I understand that contributing to open source, in most cases, except for you, for instance, that you had an opportunity to go to outreach where you could get level of funds basically to support what your contribution in open source. Most times you would start contribution within open source more as a volunteer, a contributor, and most times it's not tied
Mm-hmm.
to more like payment or anything. How are you able
Mm-hmm.
to balance your personal goals to learning with your career and then your contribution in open source?
Actually, that's a very important question, and I've been lucky that I went through outreach, went through Railgun, I went through outreach. Even when I started to develop on C Python, I was mentored. I got into Python through mentorship
Mm,
at that
mm,
time. But I want to emphasize, like, I think a little bit of what I talked about. I think it would depend more about your goal,
yeah.
right? First, if you ask yourself, why do I want to contribute to open source? The why will drive you more
Mm,
than actually what you want to do,
yeah.
right? For example, if you're me, probably I wanted maybe to just become actively, like being an active contributor. But if you have no reason, for example, I could give you one good reason to something that could make you drive you to doing open source is that open source can give you a platform to learn but also develop experience.
Mm,
There is no point in time where you will have gained all the knowledge you ever need. Even senior engineers, 50 years old,
mm,
are always uh, are always looking out to learn something new, right? So everybody will always be on a learning journey. So if you at least you have no motivation, at least do open source because you want to learn something. If you are a student, open source, it should be your first job experience, even if you're not paid, right? If you're lucky to get into outreach, we can thank God for that. But if you do not get into outreach, volunteer at least to get the experience. What does that mean? If you contribute to the Linux kernel, for
mm,
example, in your next code interview, when they're asking for experience, you are going to show that,
mm,
right? You didn't have to go to a real job like maybe Google to register experience, but you can tell the next interviewer that these are my contributions in the Linux kernel. He is not going to refute because many people are using the Linux kernel in the
mm,
world. It's even your impact, the impact of your code is even wider, right? So I think the first thing is you need to have a certain sort of drive. Why? Because the why usually drives our
mm,
actions,
mm,
right? So then, how do you balance? If you found the why, how do you balance? Because now you have this passion, you have these benefits that you've seen that you will get just by contributing to open source. So then how do you go about it? The truth is that if you're a student and you're looking for money, you need to pay the
mm,
bills,
mm,
right? And I don't think that it's very realistic to just contribute to open source while not getting paid and you call that very
mm,
sustainable, right? You should also try to think about ways of survival even as you contribute to open source. Don't expect, because open source is software you won't sell, yeah, but people have created careers around open source, right? So for survival, make sure you can also do something sustainable around your open source contributions. That's one path, right? And or if it's not really survival, it could help in your career development in a way. And if you're just a normal volunteer, even me, I'm a C Python core developer, but at its core, I am just a
mm,
volunteer. Please make sure you're very realistic about the time you're giving to your employer and the open source contributions you're making, right? Make sure open source will always be
mm,
there. Do not burn out thinking that if I don't make contribution, Python is not going to be no more tomorrow. Trust me, that's not true. Please give your time to that job that maybe pays your bills, because to some degree it's important. Money is important. Let's not shy. Let's be honest with each
Yeah.
other, right? So make sure you're doing the right balance and giving open source the right amount of time you give it. Trust me, even if you don't contribute to it, it will still be there tomorrow. If you have to take care of your family today, you can pause your open source contributions and pick up next month. The open source project will still be there. So you have to make very educated decisions and make your priorities right. If you're lucky and your open source is your full-time job, we really thank God for that, right? Then do your all, but also make sure you're taking care of your mental health, because burnout is real. Because most of us contribute to open source because we are very passionate and we love to write code for these projects. But then, I mean, if you don't rest, you're going to burn out, and burnout is real. So make sure you also balance your time out on making meaningful contributions to open source, but also rest and take some time off for your family and for yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you've basically said it all. Burnout is real. Most of us that contribute to open source, we contribute because we have passion. And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult for people to know how to place the priority, right? Basically, knowing that your priority should first go on what gives you funds, because funds comes with motivation. Motivation drives passion. So that can't be, like misplaced. I That takes me on to my next question. Um, Currently, we have very low participation of women within the open source space. In research says that in the tech space general, we have about 19% of women, but in open source, we have lower than 13%. Do you think that there are certain um, activities around the open source ecosystem that is driving lower participation for women?
Yeah, and they are both good and bad. And it's just that the bad ones. Okay, there is no good thing around people not being in open
Mm-hmm.
source, but I think there are genuine reasons that could be pushing women away. And I do not want maybe to dwell on. Of course, we've heard about the obvious
Mm-hmm.
things. Some of these communities are not very welcoming. Let's be honest
Yeah.
about it. Sometimes if even as a woman, I feel guilty if I'm talking about these topics, because certain people start to perceive me like I'm victimizing myself. Instead of working hard, I'm now becoming a victim. But I think these are honest conversations we need to
Yeah.
have. I'll give you an example. I mentor Pilates Kampala, and every year when there is outreach, when it's time for outreach applications, we literally have like a special drive in Pilates Kampala for people, like to help folks like do their essays, to help folks like choose open source projects and make contributions to them. And I witnessed like one time this lady, I was actually with her. I tell her to ask a question in our community. Like, can you ask about this bug and how you can go attempting it, right? And the response, it was like on IRC. I was like literally next to her. We were reading the response to her questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And 5 gentlemen in that community, I won't say the name of, they start by laughing, like lol. You know how you say
Yeah.
lol? And then they go on to make statements of what, like, who even does this or who even doesn't know this? Because she was asking about some log files and how they interpret them or process them, so she can
Yeah.
understand the
Yeah.
information there. It's a genuine technical difficulty. You don't expect a beginner to know
Mm-hmm.
that. But just because for them the skills had become second nature to
Mm-hmm.
them, they laughed at her and were like, we don't expect anybody to ever ask that question. So those are just examples of microaggressions. They look like minor, but how can a whole community start laughing at an intern who's just applying for outreach? So I'm saying one of the reasons is like how the communities and the members and how they interact with each other. Most of them are very sexist. First, even for very technical women that join these groups and they know what they're doing, they'll start applying like, I want to be a release manager, and like, we've never had a female release manager. We don't trust you. Do you have a family? Do you have this? Right? So it's sometimes these things are already, the sexism is already inbuilt in our communities, in these open source communities, and so these things make the women to shy away. That's one, but two. And I talk about this with a friend of mine called Marlene. She was one of the PSF directors before I joined. We talk about like the lack of role models for women in those communities, right? The CPython core team has, I think right now we are 6 women. I think 6 or 7 women right now, right? And Marietta was the first female core developer. She didn't, for like almost more than 20 years, there had never been a female core developer. So I would imagine like what was in her mind to even think about being a core developer when she was not seeing anyone like herself, right, on the core team. So that lack of people you can identify with in these communities is what's maybe scaring most of the women. It's for women, but also people of color like us or Africans like us, right? Just like you said, I'm the only African core developer there. So even that is probably scaring many Africans to join the CPython core team because they're like, oh, we can never identify with that, right? So that's the first. What's the action point here is that there needs to come up brave women like us to take up some of these leadership roles or in these key open source communities, even for just the sake of encouraging others to think like it's possible, right? It's possible for me. They can identify with us. They're like female like us, maybe black like us, right? If they see someone who looks like them, then they'll be encouraged to join. So if I summarize this question, I would say there are genuine hindrances in these communities, but if you persist a lot and you make sure that your technical skills are shining, people will never argue with your skills, right? They can argue back and forth about your gender, but if you show them that you can solve a memory leak in the Linux kernel, no one is going to argue about that. You're going to have fixed a problem, right? So just work on your skills and no one will ever argue about that. Then two, even as women, let's make sure we take up leadership positions in these key open source areas so that people that look like us get encouraged to come to join these open source communities.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. I think you've said something. It reminded me of when I got into the GNOME project and I was elected as the first African. That was back, my first election was in 2020, and I can imagine, I was looking at comments from different communities because GNOME had never had an African on the board of directors. The comments were both positive and negative. And I would say that it had so much turn on me at the time, but I had a drive, I had something to achieve. And so I didn't let that, stop what I wanted to achieve. And then I was reelected again for the next term. I think that was last year. So I'm going on my second term on the board of for GNOME. Now, this drives me to my next question. I think there are not so many women that has this level of drive that we have. That when we get into a community, we see a gap and there is a burden on us to want to basically fill in that gap by being there. Because the truth is, if we are not being represented in leadership, there would be no spokeswomen for things that are happening. And I think that right now, women are beginning gradually, though, within the open source space to take on leadership positions. What then can we do as women leaders in open source to help drive in more participation of newer women that are coming into open source? Let me start by saying that there's a research there's a research done by Linux Foundation that I think that was last year that talked about women even complains about maintenance of projects not merging their requests for change. So it's a thing to get into an open source project and make a very core contribution. It's another thing for your contribution to be accepted, for your pull request to be accepted. So what can we do in this space to see that from the I would say from start to finish, to ensure that women are, get empowered to come into open source, and they are also able to get their contribution, accepted.
That's a very important. And I had this discussion like the whole of PyCon last month when I went to PyCon in April. I think I had a whole week where every day I was having this discussion of like us women or even people of color, if you're from Africa, right? What do we do to empower each other, right? And I noticed that you need a special, even kind of skill to be a leader in these new areas. Like if you're African, there's a mentality we have like we are inferior most times. So when we come to the US, sometimes we shy away. And it's a unique skill that Africans, first of all, need to have to make sure that they stop thinking about themselves as maybe small people, okay, like they're not worth it when they reach these discussions. Anyway, let me answer this question directly. We have to be very intentional as women or women like us who are in leadership, like you who is on the board, me who is on the board too, and also a core developer. We have to be very intentional about encouraging people who look like us or who aspire in our communities to be a part of these communities. What do I mean being intentional? If you are a C Python core developer and you see certain contributions from Africa, it's not bad to say, let me focus my reviews on maybe pull requests that come from this region. There is no evil in that because you're actually solving a problem. I mean, certain people are going to look at you a certain way. I'm not saying that it's all going to be joy. Certain people are going to say you're being maybe it's favoritism. But at the end of the day, we are forgetting that this is an actual problem. The reason a core developer from the US can easily review another pull request from a US author is because they probably have met at a conference, right? They know each other somewhere because we are humans, so that's what happens. And because the pull requests are many, usually even when a familiar name shows up on GitHub, you're like, oh, let me just look. How this guy, I met him at PyCon. No, his pull request is here. Maybe let me review it, right? It's because you've met that person somewhere, right? The fact that Africans maybe don't come to PyCon US, your name will never ring a bell to most core developers. Let's be honest. So if you are a leader in these communities, you have to come to terms with that problem and be intentional about it and say, okay, it looks like I'm favoring folks from a certain region, but actually no, I'm actually solving a problem. Let me look at more of these PRs that are probably coming from Nairobi, even if I don't know them, because we need to encourage them to join the community as well. So I think to summarize this point, you have to really be intentional about if you're a woman, if you're maybe from an underrepresented area, you have to be very intentional about doing something on the underrepresentation of those areas. And you have to know that when you do those things, people are going to welcome your contributions to it. So if you're a director of Genome, for example, and you suggest something like that, no one is going to discourage you, trust me. Some random people on the internet, of course, may have some harsh words for you, but at the end of the day, people will always be happy that you're encouraging certain folks from maybe women or people of color to join the community. So people will always be supportive of you. The second thing, I already said intentional, but secondly, that's very close and it's very important for folks like us who are on the boards, right? Because when you're on a board, you're making decisions, right? I don't know about you, but as a PSF director, we are always voting things like for funding and things like that. So in a way, we decide where like the resources, the money, where the money is going, for example, right? Money from our sponsors, because the PSF exists so that Python as a language stays relevant. So we decide where the money goes, right? And of course, if there is no African or women or a woman director or African director, no one will know that there is a need in Uganda or a need in Nigeria, right? It's obvious, right? So when you join the board, make sure you're also speaking to these issues. Do not be shy, right? Because you're doing the communities you represent a sort of disservice. If you join the board, do not shy away from representing women communities like PyLadies. For example, if you're in PSF, for Genome, I don't know what other women communities you have there, but I believe they are similar, right? Speak out about the interests of those communities. Sometimes those boards, it's not that they ignore the women communities. They just don't know how to help or where those communities are. So if you shy away from those matters and you don't speak about them, you are doing those communities a disservice. And sometimes you have to learn to be a little bit, I don't want to say aggressive. I don't know, maybe aggressive or persistent or whatever on certain matters, right? Argue out your points. And so I'll give an example. Recently, we were talking with Marlene about some challenges when we get certain issues on the board and there are decisions to make. Maybe the LGBTQ thing is usually the biggest, and it's in relation to African communities. And sometimes there can be discussions that are being made on oversight that doesn't match our culture, or that's even more offensive sometimes to our culture. In those cases, you're not actually supposed to be shying away. Be aggressive enough to speak to some of these things in relation to your culture. In Asia, the same thing happens. Their culture is a little bit different. There are certain things you don't have to. There is a certain way you're not supposed to be talking to them because it's presumed or assumed as being disrespectful, right? So if you're from the Asia, make sure in those discussions you're aggressive enough or bold enough to speak to those issues and advise the board not to take certain directions. Because if you do not get a little bit more aggressive and a bit more vocal, then unfair policies are going to go out to the communities where you represent. So you have to be intentional and a little bit very aggressive and learn to put on a much more tougher skin when you're speaking to certain issues that benefit our communities.
I think that this is basically has drawn me to basically what I did this time around on the board. We actually voted on for the first time to have a diversity appearance at an event in Nigeria, and I'll be traveling to Nigeria for this event. And we voted so that I had to personally write a proposal. People in Africa don't know the Genome Project enough to even participate. How do you get people to participate into a project they are not really aware about how it works, the structure, and all of that? So what I did was to, write a proposal to the board and say, hey, we have to put intentional efforts and funds towards diversity. It's important. There's a problem. There are no African developers working on the Genome Project that I know of at the moment, or maybe recognizable. It's a problem, and we have to put our funds where we would, more like see value. I thank God that everyone voted and we're able to push on this project to the next level. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be in Nigeria talking about the Genome Project. And this has never been done in the Genome Project. We had never had to, talk about diversity in this way. And I feel like if that is one of the things I am bringing to the GNOME project, I think it's enough to see that the visibility of the project and to see also that people within, like myself, are able to see that this project exists and we can create a space for you to be part of the project. Like you say, for instance, we have membership, right? So it means that when you make your contribution, you can apply to become a member of the Genome Project. To be a member, you need 2 or 3 people to basically vouch for your work. So if you're
Mhm.
coming from Africa and you don't know
Mhm.
anyone within the African space to vouch for your work, it becomes a problem. I've seen several, I would say, everyone that came to Genome from Africa that is a member of Genome at the moment came, I had to vouch for every one of them because
Mhm.
they know me
Mhm.
on the board. So it's like, oh, Regina, we
Mhm.
have this person having a membership application. What do you think? And all of that. And I have to say something. So we can't take away the fact that being in a leadership position is key to helping drive women participation and basically newcomers participation into the open source project. But like you've said, and you've said it all, we need to have tough skin. We need to speak up when we are in
Mhm.
leadership position. We shouldn't be ceremonial heads or ceremonial board heads. We are there to make a change, and we should make this change the best way we can. Like you said, it's not too much to give some level of attention to underrepresented communities within your project and review their contribution with honest feedbacks without downplaying what they've done so far. The story of the internship you mentioned is quite pathetic. I mean, what do you really expect an intern to know at that stage? And having this conversation as well is one thing that I'm very happy that we are having this conversation, and there should be more conversations about this. This is the only way we can drive change. This is the only way we can have people understand that we are about to create a very wide gap in the open source ecosystem. If we do not begin to speak up, things are happening, things are real.
Mhm.
People are getting more more like less excited about being part of open source communities. People are really, going back thinking that they're either not good enough or they will not be accepted or their contribution will not be seen as important. So it's a good thing
Mhm.
that we're having this conversation. And that, takes me to the closing of our talk today, which is supposed to be for 30 minutes. I'm so glad that you mentioned about your book because I was going to say that you have a book on Amazon, which I looked at, which is Python 2 and 3 compatibility. If you're going to listen to this podcast again, go and check it out. It's very good content, very, very good content. So to close out, are there anything you're working on that you would like to share?
Yeah, so currently I most of my work, I am working on some research, and I have a couple of patents coming
Mm,
out. So my work is on obviously Python, and I specialize mostly on garbage collection. So you can look out for some of my papers. We have worked on a couple of I've been working on so many optimizations on memory layout for dynamic languages, of course, prototyping in
mm,
Python, but some of these things can be applied to other languages. So there are really techniques that uh, are transferable to different technologies or languages. I really love community, so I continue to be one of the organizers for PyLadies Kampala. Even when I'm in Canada, I'm literally every Saturday I am on a call with somebody at PyLadies Kampala. So those are things I continue doing. We are organizing PyCon in Uganda,
wow.
our very first PyCon, and it's going to happen in September. I hope to very much fly back to Kampala to really be at this PyCon, our very first PyCon for the Pearl of Africa. So if any folks want to come to Kampala, please reach out, and we'll tell you if you want to consider submitting a talk at PyCon Uganda. Please feel very free to do that for the next year. For my third year on the board, this discussion has actually, I wanted to resign from the board recently, and the reason I wanted to resign was was around the pressure I was having. It felt like I was the only one on the other side
Mm,
on most
mm,
discussions on the board, right? You know how they bring a motion and you're always the one speaking against
mm,
it. And I was asking Marlene, is this normal? But from this discussion and her discussion, you've confirmed certain aspects of it. She was like, it is normal. If you're from a rare community, if you have a rare background, you are always going to be against most things in a good way, because these people, they don't know where you're coming from. So it's normal. You just have to continue speaking about it. I felt a bit very discouraged, almost leaving or resigning or giving up my board seat. But I was very encouraged. So in the next year, we are going to have. I'm going to be involved in several discussions about how we can bring some of the PSF programs to Africa, revolve evolve the ambassador program. We are launching a community leadership council as the PSF, and we want it to be in underrepresented, focus on underrepresented areas like Africa. So I am very excited for that. We are going to move fronts on that, and at a director level as well, we want to make sure that research is also mainstream at conferences like PyCon or DevConf or whatever it is, and we'll have like research published in like proceedings, prestigious proceedings. So I am looking forward to a lot of things in community, and interacting with several folks in Africa and seeing how Python can be like a household name here, not like a US thing, right? Yeah, so I am excited about that.
Wow, this is quite interesting. I think I should just add to let you know that being on the other side is more like, I would say, a default for us as minorities in board seats, right? This is my third term as well. And I could tell you that my first two term was not as simple as it is. But this third term, for instance, as I said, I'm going to Nigeria because I had to make them see that we have to have put money where it can be more appreciated, right? And I'm going to have this conversation. We had to, become a sponsor at the event, and I'm going to be speaking to them about the GNOME project, what we do, how to participate. My aim is to see that I drive this from the beginning to the end. It means that I don't intend for people to come into the community, make their contributions, and they will not be seen. I intend to ensure that I'm at the beginning and see through
And
to
yeah,
the end, because that's the only way the result I'm expecting would come through. And I think the more we stay on leadership roles, the more gradually our voices will be heard. Like I said, what I'm going to do right now in Genome has never been done before. We've never had to have to sponsor an event, right? But I said we can give the lead to diversity. And right now, for this term, we only have three. For this bottom, we only have three things we are focusing on, and one of it is diversity. So it means that we, in this term of the board, are intentionally trying to see that we give more years to diversity activities within Genome. And this is how it is. It doesn't come very simple, but it's one step at a time, one step at a time, and one step at a time. What do you say about people that would want to join PyCon, but they don't want to go into coding? Are there other areas available for them? Will they be welcomed and all of that?
Yeah, so Python, we are very lucky that we have, or we are a home to one of the popular programming languages in the world. And Python is not, much as it's a programming language, we have seen it being used in several domains of our world. Python is being used for music. Python is being used by people to go to space. Python is being used by people in education. Python is being used for literally different things. And being a programming language, most of the tasks are around programming, but that's a little of what Python is. We have documentation needs in our community, needs to help us design maybe the PSF website, even on C Python core. we have tasks around just managing. We have currently we are even going to hire another developer in residence, but literally their task is not even writing code. It's managing the project, the bug tracker, who is the release manager, and the releases on time, and security tasks being routed to the team in time. Is this so? There is more than code. There is more to do in the Python community than code. Also, you can organize community, and if you organize community activities for 5 hours in a month, for just 5 hours in a month, you have the privilege to be a voting member of the PSF.
Wow.
That means you can vote for directors and have a lot of privilege, because we consider community organization as a very significant contribution to our community, equal to what a core developer does, right? So do not think that Python is just code. Organize community, organize meetups, start a Python user group, start a PyLadies chapter, and the PSF will be more than willing to fund you. If you are a university and you want to develop a curriculum around Python, we can support you both technically and even with funds from the PSF. I want to give a statistic that made me feel very bad or sorry last year. When we attended the members meeting, our executive director gave the statistics of how grants, the percentage of grants that go to different areas. And they say that only about 10% of PSF money goes to Africa, and a little bit, like 16 or something, goes to Asia. So I asked them a direct question, like, is it that you reject these grants, or it's the traffic? And the story, what made me very sad is they say that it's the traffic. We don't see. We are literally looking for people to apply for this money.
Wow.
The PSF is in surplus right now. We are in surplus, but we are not seeing like grants coming from Africa. And by grants, mostly we fund community activities. So contribute to the Python community by starting a community in your area, or a chapter of something in your area. Just talk about Python. We will fund you. We have the money. Our sponsors are always saying we want to reach the developers. Where are they? So the PSF is ready to fund you. We have more than enough money. Africans are not asking for the money. So please, there are more areas, and we have the money to help you if that's your biggest bottleneck for getting involved. And our grants program is our biggest contributor to outreach. So we use the grants program as to reach out to more people to join our community, either through even open source, because we give grants for people that have open source projects. We give grants to even people that are working on research, independent or in teams. So we use our money a lot to make sure we are encouraging volunteers to contribute to our community. So you don't have to be a programmer. Anything really counts. Teacher, community organizer, anything, diversity and inclusion expert. Come write code of conduct for us, right? Come and just tell us about, be our ambassador, right? We have something we call PSF ambassadors. We just want you to advise us about what's happening in Kenya, what's happening in Cameroon, because we don't have like PSF staff there or PSF directors from there. We want that domain knowledge. That is also a contribution, just existing and telling us something about how we can be of impact to those communities as an ambassador. So yeah, there are so many areas. And my email is always available. If you have any question about how to get involved, I have so many ways. I have so many areas. Just tell me what you're passionate about. There is an area I can push you to, or hand you over to somebody that can place you somewhere in this Python community. Yeah.
Wow, it has been a very, I don't know how to explain this, a very exciting, interesting, and practical discussion with you, Joanna. I hope that when you're listening to this discussion later, I hope that you are able to get everything you need to join the Python community. And as she said, the community is open. You can reach out to her. She's going to take you through from the beginning to the end. And should you feel like you are interested within the GNOME project as well, please, my DM is open. Let me know what you want to do, and I will do the best to help you. We are also with Outreach here as well, and GSOC, another project, but we're also doing something, that means the GNOME project, also doing something within diversity for this bottom. Want to see that we have more words out there for people to participate and become part of open source in general. I'm going to give it maybe few seconds for Dorothy. Would you like to ask a question, or you basically have something you want to share before I give my final go? Do you have something you like to share, Dorothy? You could give a thumbs up and I'll open you up to speak, if that is fine. Okay, I don't think she wants to say anything. So, in the absence of that, thank you so much, Joanna, for this interview. It was interesting, it was exciting, it was everything good, and we should have more of this conversation. Okay, so as for you to join Open Source Stories with Regina, you're going to be getting a post from me on Twitter, because I checked you out on LinkedIn and it doesn't seem like you're very much active there. So you're going to get a post from me on Twitter with an appreciation card designed for you to just say thank you so much for being part of Open Source Story with Regina. And I hope that we get to meet in any of the conferences in future. Let's keep the conversation going, Joanna. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was great and nice talking to you. We should have another chat sometime.
Yes. I'm thinking on the episode 2, we are going to talk about something in episode 2, so I will call you in again. But that would be for the next episode. For this episode, I'm going to have having just 6 interviews. So for the next episode, hopefully there will be more exciting things to talk about, and then we can run up something else as well. Thank you so much, and have a
Okay.
beautiful evening. Um,
All right.
Bye, Dorothy. Okay. Oh, hold on. Sorry, please. Dorothy wants to say something. 1 minute. Let me make you. Just give me a minute, Dorothy. I'm gonna make you a speaker now. Yeah. So you're approved to speak, Dorothy. You can speak now. Dorothy is going to be speaking shortly. I think she's trying to connect. Yeah. So you can unmute yourself, Dorothy, and speak.
Okay, thank you, Regina. Thank you, Joanna. I was honestly hooked to this space. I love that you're talking about open source and how, as Africans, we can evolve. I'm actually interested in contributing to open source, but for some reason I get stuck with a code base. And just like how Joanna was mentioned, like the support, I don't really feel like sometimes we get the support, but also you can't also hang on that. Like if they don't answer your question, or maybe you're just overwhelmed, um, sometimes you don't get the answer, and then but still you can't keep crying about that. So how do we get better at contributing? Because for most of us, we start but we don't really succeed or maybe proceed, or continuously contribute. You may contribute for a short time, but then coming back to it becomes quite difficult. Some code bases are really complex. So how do you guys do it? How do you hang on, like, to a point that you're a core developer, to a point that you keep contributing? Yeah, so maybe that would be nice to hear from you guys. But also, I'm interested to learn more about the genome and also be a core developer as well. Yeah, thank you.
I think I can ask Joanna to start. Then I'll.
Ah, Okay, that's actually a very important question. So Dorothy, it seems to me that you already have the passion and your goal. So that's the most important. We figured that out. So right now, we need to be a little bit persistent. And I don't want to end my answer there because persistent is not a very useful answer. How? It looks like you are already persistent. I'll give you a simple skill for C Python. So I see many new contributors join, and the very first problem they have, if they have no mentorship, the very first challenge they have is they don't know what to work on, right? What you have to know that if C Python is difficult, I call it a beast. The code base is difficult. It's a programming language, so the whole compiler process is a bit complex. In that, even core developers are striving for relevance and they are looking for easy tasks to work on. Because to be a core developer, by the way, to keep your commit rights, you have to be active on the project. If you're not active, they don't take away your commit rights, but they put you in an inactive state. So even core developers are looking for things to work on, and so it's because the project is difficult. Just to give you some hope, even core people struggle to find things to work on. So it's not a feeling that only you face. But I'll tell you my skill and what I try to do to make maybe you could try some of these things. Do not be very ambitious about your contributions. I'm going to repeat and I'll give an example. Do not be very ambitious about your contribution. During PyCon US, I was mentoring a lady from India to contribute, and of course I brought her in our sprints room with other core developers, and I gave her a first time task. I told her, write some tests, right? So before we talked, she was like, I have never even found a documentation task to work on. So I gave her some tests. I'm like, start. See, Python is very broken, so let's write these tests. She made 2 contributions, and she was like, then she started telling me, no, I don't feel like I've made enough. This is not big enough. Give me a very big feature, right? That I can start. Give me maybe to write the symbol table or the compiler. I want to feel like I need something complex to show my relevance here on this project. And I'm not going to criticize her, but I think the process has to be gradual. Be very graceful with yourself. If it means starting with typos, start there because your knowledge improves there. Start in the docs, fix typos, but as you're in the docs, you're reading about Python and what it does. You're reading about the standard library, for example, and how it's working. And as you're reading, you're fixing certain documentation typos. Then graduate. Most programmers, they don't want to start there. They will see typos and they'll be like, no, this is not complex enough. They're going to despise me. No, that's where we start. Then from docs, I advise people to go and read the tests because tests literally show you. If you read tests, then you understand the functionality in the code. If you read tests that are testing, for example, the OS module in Python, right? You're going to understand how each method is written from just reading the tests. As you read the tests and map to the functions that these tests are testing, then you're going to find certain things. You'll be surprised. Core developers forget to write certain tests for different methods. You see? So your contributions are starting to build up. Then next, you start to write tests. Then as you get familiar with tests, you start to read certain functions and you're like, they forgot to catch an exception, right? Here, they did not take care of this corner case. You're just looking at one standard library module, which is the OS module, right? And you're reading code, but you'll find areas of improvement by reading the code. I've found that that's the most useful. So programming, you're already a programmer, Dorothy, because I know you. I hope you know that modifying an already existing code base is harder than starting your new project. Starting a project from scratch is very easy. And so the skill of learning to read code is equally important or even more important than writing code. It's equally important. So invest a lot of time in reading code and understanding it. That's where we find tasks to work on. Realistically, I can tell you that those bug trackers we have, like on popular projects like CPython, most easy tasks have already been taken. Most of the things you find there are difficult tasks that even core developers don't know how to solve, right? So it's not sometimes a very realistic place to start, though sometimes we label some issues as low-hanging fruit. But I wrote a blog post about that for CPython. Those low-hanging fruit, it's just that core developers are used so much to the project, they label them as low-hanging fruit, but they're actually not low-hanging fruit, right? So I would advise that you start in simple ways, right? We know you are a very hardcore developer, but start small. Be very graceful. Build your knowledge very slowly. If it means starting with the docs, then go to the test, and then start reading code module by module. Start with your favorite library, for example, in CPython. If it is SSL, if it's the SSL module, start by just reading the code in there, right? And see what you can improve or any suggestions you can introduce in there. But also for CPython, we have a whole mailing list for newcomers, right? It's called CPython Core Mentorship. You can always email that mailing list. Core developers will always respond to you. If you're failing to build the project, just email on that mailing list, and then we'll be able to help. The CPython core team is also on Discord. There is a whole new channel for new contributors, and when you ask a question there, we will always respond. We are on Discuss, like discuss.python.org. If you ask a question there, we will always help. Even a question like, I want to start contributing to CPython. How do I get started? Folks will respond to you, and we have a code of conduct. If anybody tries to shut you down, we will remove them from the mailing list, because we have a whole Python code of conduct that we work with. So we encourage newcomers like you. And I'm not going to say, so it's not going to be a little bit simple. I have to be very honest with you, right? People don't become core developers because by luck. You need to be a bit persistent. I hope this is what I also have to tell you the truth, right? You need to be a little bit intentional and a little bit persistent and persevering. Yeah, you put on a tough skin and stay. If your goal is to become a core developer, do not quit after week 1 before you can even build a project. I've mentored over 15 people from Africa to become core developers, and they couldn't even go beyond building CPython, right? So also you have to be a little bit persistent alongside those a few things I've tried to discuss to penetrate these communities. If you are lucky, you can reach out on the side to certain core developers you meet at conferences and meetups and be like, can you mentor me? Most times if you ask for mentorship on a general mailing list, people will rarely respond to you. But if you meet folks at a meetup, ask for the mentorship at a personal level, they will always try to be as helpful as they can to you. I hope I've tried to answer the question.
Okay, I will just basically continue from where Joannah said. Just like Python community, we also have basically code of conduct. But just to give you a context, even while working with Linux and being a database administrator and working with now a software engineer, I didn't start my GNOME contribution from a coding standpoint. So in GNOME, we basically have about different angles you could come in. So you could come in as to develop our app, of course, or documentation, or engagement team. So I came in from the engagement aspect. So the engagement is basically more like outreach, and event organizations and, website development and the likes. And I chose this part of contribution in open source because I really didn't want to do the same thing I'm doing for my work for my open source contribution. I feel like this way I can manage my contribution and be continuous, more like be sustainable. I don't want to finish developing codes at my day job and end up doing the same thing for my open source contribution. So this is how I decided to more like channel my contribution. So for me, I would say, while you want to do your contribution within any project, try to look at what you can do and you can sustain. I think the sustainability is key. Sustainability is key. What can I commit to continuously? The work of a software engineer, for instance, is a lot of work. Am I able to do software engineering at my day job? I think we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, Joannah was talking about the importance of prioritizing what gives you funds over open source, because you need money to sustain, right? I don't know if you joined at the beginning, but Joanna made mention of that. You need money to sustain, and you need to know, if I'm going to be doing, for instance, a software engineering job at my day job, can I continue with the same energy for open source contribution if I'm not going to be paid? If yes, go ahead. But if no, then look for something else that you want to develop in. For me, I felt like I'm already doing something within, developing code and all of that, and working within databases and Linux for a lot of time. I wanted to do something that's way different from the things I'm doing, learn new skills, right? So going into the engagement team for me was a whole lot, because I really didn't, more like I would say, I don't plan events originally. I don't do outreach for a technology product originally. I just basically do backend development. So having to stretch myself out of that part basically helped me to see what is going on in the marketing side of things, and also being a backend developer. So I think the first thing I would say is, think of what you can do consistently without any burnout. I think, and Joanna mentioned that as well. What is your day job? Can you give the same time of your day job to your open source contribution? If yes, go ahead. If no, is there other skills you would need to support what you do in your day job to take you onto your career goals? If yes, then make your contribution within that area. So if you go to gnome.org, basically, you would see gnome.org get involved, and you see different ways you can get involved with gnome.org. We also have our Discourse channel, but we use basically metrics for most of our communications. And you can also still send me a DM. If you find any of this a bit difficult to get into, I would help you to get your place in there. We have a newcomers channel, same way. The newcomers channel is basically a lot of people commenting on newcomers channels every day. And like Joanna said, it's not going to be that simple, right? But it's a good thing that you're here, we're having this conversation. So someone knows you already, and someone can help you, hold your hands while you get through to the community. So I think that's exactly how I would say I would answer your question. I hope I've been able to basically answer your question the best way. Thank you, Maureen, for joining. I think we are almost done. I don't know if you caught anything. Would you like to ask a question? We could give you some minutes to ask a question and before we close the space. If you would like to ask a question, you can have a thumbs up and I would open you up to speak. Okay, so I don't think Maureen wants to say anything. Okay, so thank you so much again, Joanna, for joining. Like I said, you get a card from me to say thank you for joining Open Source Stories Virginia. This space is going to be, turned into a podcast where on Spotify, where you could also share to other people that would like to listen. I'm going to also attach a link to that podcast. The podcast is going to come out maybe, let me say, by Tuesday latest, and you could share it to your contact as well to listen again. It's been a great and wonderful conversation with you, Joanna. Thank you, Dorothy and Maureen, for joining. And I wish you ladies a beautiful, beautiful evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.